Good day, everyone, on the Bing Inlet Historical Group Facebook page. Please join me in welcoming author of the book, The History of Byng Inlet and the Shoreline Communities, with my friend and co-conspirator, Mr. Fred Holmes. Welcome.
Thank you, Gary.
Appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. I know a lot of people have read your book, and hopefully a lot more people will read your book. Let's start our conversation today. It's going to be a little organic in that I got a couple things I want to ask you, but we've known each other for a long time and been involved in this history project a long time. What is your personal connection to Bing Inlet there, Fred?
So our connection really started as overnight boaters staying at Wright's Marina, and that's how we found Bing Inlet. And over the years, we kept running from Penetanguishing and making Bing Inlet one of our key spots to stop. And in fact, during one of the years, we made it our turnaround spot. We just kind of found a magnetic personality with this inlet, and we just kept saying we have to come back. And finally, my wife said, "That's it for the boat. It's time to not rock and roll at night, but I want something that doesn't move." So we bought a cottage on Bing Inlet's North Channel. And the first thing I found out is that my neighbor and the cottage both had a lot of history. And the message here for everyone listening is when you have a neighbor with a lot of history, write it down. Don't get caught up in the sure wish saga, which I hear so often. People die and their history dies. And so did Gerald, unfortunately. But he was a CPR trained man back here to Sudbury and return, and my cottage neighbor.
So, needless to say, you got the bug pretty quick. What was the thing that you could say again, going back to your boating into there was something there was you kind of there was something about the inlet that kind of made you and your wife kind of say this is where we want to start brick and mortar part of our lives, so to speak. um but what was it I know a lot of people talk about the terrain and its connection to Georgian Bay and that kind of stuff. Was there one particular thing that, that one conversation maybe that you and your wife may have had that kind of really kind of made you passionate about that area?
Uncrowded would be the first word. I mean, when you leave Penetanguishing and go to Sans Souci on the eastern archipelago, it's like Highway 400 from Toronto to Barrie.
Hmm.
Uh, you got to get out into the fresh air, and Bing Inlet's your first place to get real fresh air, no crowd, and then you have all of those lumber pilings sticking out of the water, and you're going, how come? How come I don't know any of this? Who's hiding it from us? And this curiosity starts to go with, we want to stay at Wright's again, and let's go poke around.
Yeah. And I could obviously relate to that, as which most people involved in the historical group can attest to as well. So there you are. You moved into this cottage. You decided to start building your connection on a more personal level with the inlet. And it's obviously a big jump to go, well, I'm going to start asking about pilings and asking about churches and asking about the house that I'm living in. But some little thing must have triggered you to decide to write it all down. There must have been some nugget of information that was like, huh. I know for me what it was, but I'll let you tell your story before I tell you mine.
So I think the key aspect is uh, this history goes back to the War of 1812. Uh, and a lot of people may not have ever heard of Anna Jameson, but in 1837 she was paddled uh, past the area, describes her night on Head Island, describes passing the various islands out by the lighthouse, and you kind of go, really, really. And then you trip over the fact that Vernon Wadsworth's great granddaughter has a cottage in Bing Inlet, and starts talking about him as if He was right there, and yet he was the surveyor of 1867, creating the mill locations. And then, of course, you had your lumber mills, and you're looking at Bing Inlet and Anson Dodge and the Georgian Bay Lumber Company, and you go, well, look at those concrete foundations, and look at those concrete walls, and this curiosity kept building, and then you find out that Eli Clinton Clark built a mill on Mill Island, and you go, but there's really no signage. There's no knowledge of what this happened. Uh, and you're in the age of sail. You're before steam engines and whatnot. And then everything transforms into the Bigwood era. We have to look at Bigwood Island from our cottage, and you keep thinking about the events that he did on that island. But also, you look at the railway bridge, 1908, it crossed the Magnetawan River, the coal yards, 1910, we were there before the old dock caught fire. It was quite something. And as Gary mentioned, the schools were being built, churches were being built. My wife's a stout Catholic. Thou shalt make sure I get to Sunday church. So, yes. And then you get down to my sort of nautical roots, which is on the Norwegian side of the family. And that is the steamships. And I followed the steamships, and then they left because the train had taken over. And then I looked at the oil tanks, the tank farms. I heard the stories of the sulfuric acid farms. And then more close to home, the tourists chasing fish. And probably the icing is the vessels lost to storms. And you get a book like this Dive Ontario, and all of a sudden there are wrecks out and about Bing Inlet. And yet, who knows? Who knows about those? So we get around to the whole topic of what did you learn about Ontario history in school? And probably the square root of nothing.
Next to nothing, 100%. Even high school, for sure, nothing.
You may know about French River. You may know about voyageurs. Maybe
sure.
that Collingwood built ships, and that Thunder Bay used to be Fort William and Port Arthur, and grain ships came out of there. But what do you know about Georgian Bay history? And we learned it by camping, starting on Beausoleil Island. The campfires at night, the stories of you gotta see. And then you pick over books like James Barrie on the Sixth Great Lake. Important book because this author is connected to Bing Inlet and Bing Inlet North. And along the way, the Lynx people came in. And if you got the video, get it, read the book. This is the book version. Watch the video. This kind of sucks you in. And as you get sucked in, you keep saying, tell me more, tell me more. So we got to the point where I stopped in every convenience store, marina store on the archipelago and bought books. And all of this just got me more hooked and more hooked. And we're talking about 45 years ago. So that's when I kind of got really into the groove. So then it got down to, well, what's the history of Bing Inlet? And this gets down to writing the book. So first of all, Bing Inlet was a gap on the Penetanguishing to Killarney route. So let's get down to the key guy, James Barrie. His photographs are in this book of Georgian Bay Illustrated History. But then you go along to Cognisheen. And then you go along to the whole Moon River Basin after Cognisheen, which is a couple of books. And then you go into Sans Souci, and Henry's Fish restaurant was so important. and you run around in Perry Sound, and you tap into John McPhee as well. And then you get up to Point of Barrel, and they got a book with Ruth McQuaig's very historical book, and the fun people of the wealth of Point of Barrel in their Ojibwe Club. And then you get to Bill Campbell's book on northeastern Georgian Bay and its people. Key book. This was a motivating book for me. And then he went out and did the Pickerel and French River book. So you had a long trail finishing off in Killarney. Now, you'd notice I didn't say Bing Inlet. And so Bing Inlet was left out. Who was going to go and look at the history of Bing Inlet? And so I dug into it. It's raw research, a blank canvas, with a trail to be uncovered and discovered. And I find I'm still discovering and still learning. But by gosh, someone had to write it down. I started writing and I started writing because I had so much material. And it was an eye opener. I probably spent 5 solid years. 2 to 3 would be as a full time job, so 40 hours of work week, 52 weeks a year, probably 5,000 hours plus travel time. Travel time was gobbled up because I'm in the era before the internet. So I had to go physically to the National Archives in Ottawa, the Ontario Archives, who nicely moved from Bay and College in Toronto to York University, which became an issue. But the curiosity just said I had to record this. And I guess the biggest surprise in putting this book together was how expensive research is. That is in dollars, and on consuming time, it's a vacuum cleaner on time. So, I mean, National Archives in Ottawa, you're going to spend at least 3 nights of hotels. I mean, you got to go down to Queen's University for some of the Bing Inlet history, particularly the nautical. Ministry of Natural Resources in Peterborough to get the lumber company land grants and timber grants. All types of museums on the Bay, Southampton, the Bruce County Archives, Grey Roots Archives in Owen Sound, Midland, Penetang, outside of Barrie, subscriptions to various publications, marine historical societies. The key here is there is no one-stop shopping. Everyone has slivers, the proverbial needle in the haystack. But first you have to find the haystack, then you got to start digging out, looking for the needle. And so what I found with books is I'd get one good sliver for every $40 of book cost these days. That's up from one for $10, say 25 years ago. But that one sliver could lead you on a tangent, or it might just give you a plethora of wonderful information. And the internet is not the ultimate solution to date because these various institutions are not prepared to easily give up their material. So the whole sharing part. So what am I up to these days? Well, Gary said, what are the must finds? And there's 2 big nautical mysteries. One is the Asia. The biggest loss of human life on Georgian Bay is the loss of the Asia in September of 1882. She sits supposedly 10 miles west of Bing Inlet. But closer to the lighthouse is the schooner George Thurston. It sank in a storm 2 months after the Asia, but grounded somewhere near the old tower rocks at Bing Inlet. So it's on there. It's on my radar. I keep trying to find it, but the deep water, the high water has caused an issue. So those are the must finds, although Gary keeps finding new uh, must finds along the way. But his last item was what advice would I give all of you? And you need space, elbow room, filing cabinets, photo albums, bookcases, large flat Rubbermaids to hold maps, large memory in your computer. But I ask everyone, when you have a photograph, no matter if it's your kids, your dog, or whatever, record on the back of every picture the date received, who it's from, what's in the picture, such as people and their names, and date the picture taken or the year taken. Um, Other than that, I can only say expect tangents to distract you away from your main topic. Uh, my tangents led to additional books and published articles, and found some additional co-authors as well. So uh, write everything down and avoid the I wish I had
Mhm.
asked.
It's interesting going back to when you started talking about what was the hook? What was the hook to get you involved in all this? And my personal one was, again, you talked about the book Northeastern Georgian Bay and its people, and my mother actually did the blurb in that one. Um, the very small blurb about Bing Inlet at the time, and we had that book at our house, and I read it, and it was like interesting, and it got me to start looking into it. And as you know, Fred, in my teen years, all the way up when I started in the early 20s, when I started doing the internet side of the search back then, in the 90s and early 2000s, the that book was the hook for me, and I'm sure it is with a lot of people that have that book. But again, it was the Bing Inlet section was a very small part of that book. To your point, one of the things too in your conversation, or in our conversation right now, was your talk on tangents, and certain things that were always important to me to find out was the Judd family growing up was a big part of our great friends of ours. My uncle John at one point married into that family, and they were just wonderful people, and they we talked about Hospital Island, and Hospital Island has always been that enigma for me growing up. I was, as a kid, wondering, well, why would they put an island or a hospital on an island? It's kind of inconvenient in modern thinking, but of course, like you talked about in the age of sail, it when sickness would break out, it makes all the sense in the world to isolate everybody from the bulk of the community. But it was always this enigma for me, and wasn't until quite recently, and was going on a tangent when I was researching a lot of the information on the Magneto on Indian Day School, was references again started popping up to some of the doctors that were involved in the hospital, and that's currently taking up a lot of my time trying to dig up that. But tangents are everything. The modern quest, which is when you look at my office, I'm by the water heater. My wife has me by the water heater in the basement of my house, and I can do a lot from here, whereas you had to spin tires and literally roll up your sleeves. And I can't thank you enough for that, because now that we're on the next step, the people watching this video wouldn't be aware. We had a nice, wonderful conversation before this, showing some of the things that we're going to be looking at doing in the near future, where we can superimpose some of these older photos over top of modern Google Earth and GPS where buildings were, to be able to go back and start trying to find this stuff where you couldn't imagine that even a short time ago. So it's exciting going forward. Having a community of almost 1,100 people on Facebook, if you can believe that are interested in the area, and we're just scratching the surface. There's so much stories to tell. There's so many families that one little nugget of a name on a document sparks conversation. That's exactly the point of it all, in my opinion. So we're honored that you held up all those books. I noticed that yours wasn't in that pile, and yours is the for me to be able to um read something like that and to see your blood, sweat, and tears poured into that book. That is something that the community will cherish for a long time. And I recommend, if anyone wants to purchase that book, Fred, how would they do that?
I keep a stack at Wrights Marina, so that's basically in the warm weather season.
Mhm.
It was available there.
So I recommend everyone get out there, buy this book, sit down over a nice fire, and it will take you to places and will allow you to put on a set of goggles that's 100 years old, and you're going to see things that were hiding in plain sight. And from the perspective of some of the things that I want to achieve with respect to the Facebook group is to take everybody on that journey in a modern 2023 type context. There's a lot out there. There's a lot of stuff in basements. There's a lot of stuff in photo albums. There's a lot of stuff in just stories and oral histories of all of your families out there. Please, if you need help digitizing this stuff, if you need help finding it, reach out to any of us, and we would be more than happy to help you with that. So, Fred, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate everything that you've done. I thank you. The adventures that we have been on and the adventures we will be on will be something that maybe the next book will write about. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.